Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani. Welcome to the Beyond Wellness Radio podcast. Feel free and head over to justinhealth.com. We have all of our podcast transcriptions there, as well as video series on different health topics ranging from thyroid, hormones, ketogenic diets, and gluten. While you're there, you can also schedule a consult with myself, Dr. J, and or our colleagues and staff to help dive into any pressing health issues you really want to get to the root cause on. Again, if you enjoy the podcast, feel free and share the information with friends or family, and enjoy the show. Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Really excited to podcast today here. We're going to be talking about anti-aging and longevity strategies with Chris from Novos Labs. Chris's website is novoslabs.com and slowmyage.com. So we're going to put all that stuff in the comments below. Chris, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Very good. Well, nice to meet you here. Really excited to chat here. Big fan. Functional medicine's all about reducing inflammation, increasing nutrient density, biohacking, improving performance, the whole 9 yards, optimizing hormones. All these things are, I think as an end byproduct is going to help with aging. It's going to allow you to age slower, perform better, heal faster. So tell me, we talked about in the pre-show here a little bit about kind of the top 12 reasons why you age. Let's just hit the top 3 out of the gate. What are the big 3 things that you see people that come to you in your lab when you're testing, that you're assessing? What are the big 3 drivers that are accelerating someone's age?
Great question. So yeah, on a lifestyle basis, I think if we're just looking at the vast majority of people, the biggest contributors are going to be, number one, most likely diet, the types of food that people are eating, particularly here in the United States. The amount of calories, you mentioned nutrient density. The Americans tend to eat calorically dense food, which are void of nutrients. So that's one thing. And then also just in consideration of the timing of those meals as well. People are in this constantly overfed state. So that's one significant contributor. And say another one is sleep and just neglecting sleep. So people oftentimes will stay up later than they should. They will wake up at different times, or they'll have to wake up with an alarm clock, waking them up in the morning, and that's not ideal. Ideally, people are just waking up naturally based on their circadian rhythm, and they're getting adequate sleep, which is reflected by them waking up naturally. And so inadequate sleep or inadequate quality sleep is a contributor as well. I'd say also this one is a little bit more controversial, but I'm happy to defend it. Is nutrient deficiencies or inadequacies, more to state it more accurately. There is an abundance of nutrient inadequacies, even if you are eating a very healthy diet. If you look at, for example, the N. Haynes study of more than 16,000 Americans, and you look at individual micronutrients, you'll find that 100% of those 16,000 plus people had inadequate intakes of potassium. More than 90% had inadequate intakes of choline and vitamin D. 89% of choline, yes. 89%
I would think if you're
vitamin
eating
E.
grass-fed meat or egg yolks, I figured you'd get enough on that. But I guess maybe there are just a lot of people that are consuming a lot of processed food, maybe.
Yes, and so let's be clear on the difference between inadequacy and deficiency. So deficiency is going to be defined as what the government has set as the RDA, which is like the absolute minimum you need to avoid a short-term illness like scurvy from vitamin C deficiency, for example. And then inadequacy is defined as having less than ideal amounts of the nutrient intake relative to age and gender matched people who are healthy, relative to your age and gender. So looking at the healthiest people in your cohort, how much of these nutrients are they taking in? So this is more indicative of long-term health. And based on that, people are inadequate or taking in inadequate levels. And when it comes to choline specifically, as you know, choline is a methyl donor. And so depending on your methylation and detox genes, like MTHFR and others, you might need significantly more than even I'm accounting for when I say inadequacy. Like for myself, I'm homozygous for C677T. I need about 9 egg yolks a day, right? I'm not eating
Wow.
9 egg yolks
Right.
equivalent per day, right? But that is what is ideal for me to be able to methylate properly. And so that's not even accounting for that in that figure of over 90%.
Wow. That's crazy. So what were some of the top 5 foods? You said choline, potassium's a big one. I think the daily recommended intake on that's like around 4,700 milligrams. People just don't do that. I run like a chronometer on someone, run a sample breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Most people are getting less than half. So you said potassium, choline. I imagine magnesium was probably up there. What else?
Well, vitamin D, obviously, right? We
Yep.
all, we all know
Yep.
that people are deficient in vitamin D. And what I'll say just quickly about potassium is, the levels that you cited are an ideal level. But if you consider just um, uh, historically, we've had much higher levels of
Mhm.
potassium intake, especially compared to the sodium intake that we have now. So people can probably get even more potassium than that
Absolutely.
and still experience health benefits from it. And for that reason, I personally use light salt in addition to already eating a nutrient dense, whole foods diet. I use a light salt rather than regular sodium salt. So light salt is 50% potassium, 50% sodium. So that's
Oh,
also
that's
changing the
cool.
ratio somewhat. Yeah. So it's like
Light
a
salt. I know
little
there's new
biohack that I
salt.
have.
I know new salt
New
does like
salt
a
is,
potassium citrate.
yeah, yeah. So new salt is 100% potassium.
Yes.
You also don't want to overdo the potassium though, right? Like especially if you
Yeah.
exercise and you are sweating out your sodium, you
Yeah.
need to restore that sodium. Otherwise, you can have heart issues if you have too much potassium, right? So I don't mean to say that potassium is the cure all and that you want to avoid all salt. Salt is critically important. But
Yeah.
for the vast
Potassium
majority
has
of
that
Americans,
relationship
the
where
ratio,
it could knock. I'm sorry, go ahead. So potassium knocks the sodium down. So if you're getting a lot of sodium, but you're getting at least potassium with it, that shouldn't throw the relationship off too much.
exactly, exactly. And that's why I do the light salt and I'm eating veggies with it as well. So I'm getting some of the sodium, but then the ratio is higher on the potassium.
Right here. Is that Morton's light salt?
Yep, yep, that's it.
Oh, cool. I
Yep.
didn't know they had one that does a 50-50. That's great. I knew about the new
Yeah, and
salt and I have a
actually, yeah, the Morden salt you can find in supermarkets more easily than the new salt. A lot
that's
of
cool.
supermarkets have it.
I'll
Yeah.
add that to my mix. I like Redmond's real salt. I like the sea salt, but yeah, those are a little bit low on the potassium side. So it's good to balance that off. That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, if you want, you could do the sea salt, but and then you would use the new salt with it, right? But that's a little more tricky to like figure out what's half and
Yeah.
half or whatever. So the light
Yeah.
salt just you don't have to think about it.
That's cool. Awesome. Any other big nutrients come to mind in that NHANES study?
Vitamin E. So
Vitamin E.
93.9% of
Wow.
people. Um,
Amazing.
I mentioned vitamin D before. I have the numbers in front of me. I wrote an article about this on slowmyage.com. It's the diet and nutrition post about my own personal
Mhm.
diet, but it begins with these facts and figures. So vitamin D was 95.4% of people. Um, what else? When it comes to magnesium specifically, it was 60.9. So actually a little bit
Wow.
lower than you would expect. Like relative, everyone hears about the magnesium deficiencies or inadequacies. You would think that it would be higher, but no, actually potassium and vitamin E, vitamin D, choline, vitamin K, 71.1%. So again, higher than the magnesium. Uh, and so my position on this is that you are nearly guaranteed to have at least one inadequacy, at least one, probably multiple, even if you're eating a very clean, healthy diet. Uh,
Wow.
and again, it's not based on deficiency; it's based on inadequacy. What is the ideal intake, not the minimum intake to avoid a short-term illness?
Right. So that's kind of like the RDA versus like a daily recommended intake kind of thing. A daily recommended intake is more
Yeah,
of like more optimal versus an RDA is kind of like the minimum to prevent disease kind of thing.
yeah. So
Close to
so
it.
I would look at it as like how to optimize our biology and make
Mhm.
sure that we aren't too low on anything, right? So and
Great.
we all there are genetic factors that play a role, specific SNPs that might mean that I need a higher level of riboflavin than
Right.
you do, right? And so like, how are you really going to discover that and how you can actually feel and your biology can actually be optimized too without actually, adding in higher levels that is very difficult to do simply by eating a healthy diet. It necessitates some form of supplementation. And you don't have to go crazy with it. You could go with a high quality multivitamin, a high quality multimineral, and then make sure that you're getting adequate vitamin D, because most multivitamins don't have enough vitamin D. So you might need to take another pill for that. But once you take care of that, and choline's not typically in the vitamins either. So that you can get through the egg yolks or certain foods, or even lecithin. Lecithin is grass-fed meat. Lecithin is very high in choline and other phospholipids like inositol and phosphatidylserine and so on. So there's a number of ways to do it. But I would say, that's probably the 4 things plus fish oil, 5 things that you probably would want to supplement with for the foundation.
That's awesome, man. Really cool. So if we kind of recap for the listeners, we have potassium, magnesium, choline, vitamin E. What was the last one? Was there one more?
Vitamin K was high up on there on the list. Yep.
Excellent. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, nutrients are key, right? Because your systems, your hormonal systems, your mitochondria, they run on nutrients, not just calories, right? Calories, if typically in the real world, calories come with nutrients, and ideally organic foods and to be nutrient dense. But now in today's Neolithic age, we have a lot of calories with not a lot of nutrients. That's the problem. And that's just unlike how the body is used to working, especially if there's sweet. Sweet automatically meant more nutrition, more nutrient density. But now we have the opposite happening. So I think that's the nutrient density aspect, I think, is so important. Anything else you want to add on that?
Yeah, well, to your point about nutrient density, there was a recent study that came out that looked at, I believe it was called calorically sparse foods, right? So foods that are very low in calories. And when you think about, well, what is actually something that's low in calories? It's basically all of the natural foods out there, other than a few exceptions, like maybe like a nut butter or something is pretty calorically dense. But as opposed to eating the whole nuts or the whole seeds, right?
Right.
They looked at mice eating either calorically dense diets or the calorically sparse diets, and gave them, I believe, the same number of calories. But those eating the calorically sparse diets, or access to the same number of calories in their food, the calorically sparse diet, the mice were obviously, you would expect, healthier, gained less weight. In fact, they were lean as a result of being able to, you kind of fill up on the cellulose, and you're getting the nutrients in the diet as well from these non-calorically dense foods. And once you're eating these calorically dense foods that are also don't have many nutrients in it, that's when everything goes wrong. And that's basically the problem that we see across developed nations, especially the US right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. Now, we started off today, we went right into the nitty gritty with some of the top nutrient deficiency, which I think is important. But start off a little bit more, give a little more background about yourself. I know we chatted about a health challenge that you had when you were young. Walk the listeners through that. And then what brought you here today? What made you motivated to kind of get this information dialed in?
Sure. So I've been interested in health and nutrition ever since I was 12 years old. I started exercising and installed a pull-up bar in my basement, and started eating a healthy diet and reading Men's Health magazine and so on. And so I was into it from a very early age. So it was that much more of a surprise to me when at 16 years old, I suddenly had a seizure, and it turned out it was caused by a brain tumor. Wow. I thought that, being as healthy as I was, that what are the chances for something like this to happen to me? It came as a shock to me and my family, my friends, my classmates. And fortunately, it was successfully removed. But that experience transformed my perspective on life, changed my perspective on health, which prior to that was admittedly a superficial perspective on health. It was about being in good shape, playing sports well, being attractive. And I didn't really understand health is so much more than that until this experience. It's about biological optimization, avoidance of disease, and so on. And so from an early age, I confronted death and mortality, and never wanted to be in a hospital bed again, questioning whether I would wake up the next day alive or not. And so going through that kind of planted a seed in my subconscious. And throughout my career, I've been an entrepreneur, starting typically technology businesses, but In my personal life, I've been a citizen scientist, a N=1 biohacker,
Awesome.
self-experimenter, and I've been doing this for throughout my 20s and through my 30s. I'm basically 40 years old now, and I've always been about collecting data and seeing what's actually working for me objectively, and going straight to the source, using PubMed to do the research and try to asking myself questions and then trying to find the answers through PubMed. I came across a scientific study about 10 years ago called The Hallmarks of Aging, which was a moment of epiphany for me. That was the moment where I understood that there is a scientific explanation for why we age, and by extension, why we get diseases of aging. The number one cause of chronic illness is aging. It's actually not diet and lifestyle. It's actually the aging process in and of itself. Now, our diet, our lifestyle, our environment is going to accelerate or decelerate that. But there are these underlying biological processes that take place as we get older. And as we look at chronic illnesses and mortality risk, it goes up exponentially. In fact, it doubles every 8 years approximately after puberty, our risk of death. So seeing that there are these biological causes of aging gave me this new lens through which I could look at health and look at my own health and my own lifestyle interventions to try to slow down this pace of aging and to be as young, biologically speaking, as I possibly could. And fast forward to about 5 years ago, I teamed up with some world-renowned scientists at Harvard, MIT, the Salk Institute, people like Dr. George Church, who invented genome sequencing in 1984. He is a whale of a geneticist. He's the most respected in the industry. Dr. Matt Kaberlein, who's famous for his work with rapamycin. He's been interviewed a number of times on Dr. Peter Attia, the Drive podcast, and many others. And a number of other scientists like this who are part of the Novos team as scientific advisors. And we have our own scientists on board full-time as well. And we launched this company, Novos, with the intention of helping people to slow down biological aging to essentially be, as we like to say, younger for longer.
Awesome, man. Yeah, you talked about your past, being 16, being into health, right? Training, lifting, trying to be more fit. But it's really interesting. That community, there isn't like a big emphasis on food quality. It's like junky, maybe whey protein shakes. There's no emphasis on organic. There's no emphasis on or artificial sweeteners, toxins, hormones. There's no emphasis on eating really cleanly, soy protein, whatever, it's protein. And so it's good that you kind of evolved your thinking and really looking at all the other toxins that are potentially in these food, other additives and such. I think that plays a really important role to health as well.
Definitely. I mean, when I was a teenager, scrawny 12, 13-year-old trying to gain weight, I was taking weight gainers. I don't know if you remember this from the 90s. It's like 1,500 calorie drink just full of carbs and starches and crap.
Lots of casein too. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Exactly. And so, I evolved from that and into my early 20s, still continuing to have packaged foods, but protein bars from the South Beach Diet or Metrix and so on.
Yeah.
To
with soy protein and
aspartame
and MSG, right?
Exactly. And then in my late 20s, starting to understand the importance of the nutrients and starting to transition then into eating multiple servings of vegetables every day and getting my protein from salmon or from, eggs or chicken and so on. So trying to avoid that processed food, which didn't have the nutrients. And that's really when my journey evolved to such a degree that I felt like a different person. I feel better now at 39 years old than I did as a teenager or in my 20s. I'm sharper. I have more energy. I sleep better. It's a completely different existence, which is kind of crazy to think as I age, I'm feeling better.
Yeah, that makes sense. You had a similar background with health issues and thyroid problems and all that, and just banging my head up against the walls of conventional medicine and not really having a lot of options, only really providing symptom management and just hoping you can manage the symptoms where you're not getting to the root underlying cause. And, if you're a detective and you're looking deeper, it's easy to see that we're just covering this thing up. We're not fixing it. And so it's great to have interventions that are really solving it. That's excellent. Now, we talked about nutrition and go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I had a similar experience where I was seeing doctors trying to figure out why I was just chronically tired. I could sleep for 9-10 hours. This was in my late 20s, 9-10 hours, and I wake up, and in the middle of the afternoon, I'd feel like I had to sleep, and I'd sleep for like an hour to 2 hours and wake up feeling exhausted, and I couldn't figure it out. And it turned out, like, I went to multiple doctors, endocrinologists, ENTs, like everything. And no one had any answers for me. I had to figure it out on my own, which ultimately it turned out it was a few things, but one of them was I have a sensitivity to nuts. So I was eating almonds and cashews, and my immune system would flare up from it and make me really tired within a few hours of eating it.
Wow.
And I didn't realize that until I did an elimination diet. The second thing was the MTHFR that I mentioned. I needed higher levels of methyl donors and certain forms of vitamin B. And the third was that I was borderline anemic. I was donating blood. And although every time I would donate the blood, they would test my iron levels, they didn't test other things like ferritin. And ultimately, I was borderline anemic without them knowing it.
Anemic
and,
as a guy being anemic, you must have had some malabsorption issues in the gut.
No, it's just because I was donating blood so frequently.
Oh, because you were giving blood so much, it was lowering the ferritin. Okay, got it. Yeah, because an anti-aging thing is you give the blood to offset the high levels of ferritin because guys don't menstruate, but you were doing it too much and it was driving it down too low. Oh, wow.
Exactly. It was too often.
Yeah. So you were already thinking, thinking, let me try to reduce oxidate. So you already had that mindset, but you just overdid it a little bit.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I trusted, the standard iron level test.
Yeah,
they didn't test. It wasn't a comprehensive panel, including ferritin, and exactly. That's why it went undetected. Yeah,
makes sense. So, in regards to the lab, right? You founded Novus Labs. Talk about some of the testing you're doing. What have you found to be some of the more sensitive, kind of subclinical functional markers to assess health? Talk a little bit more about these markers.
Sure. Well, so what I think is particularly exciting in the longevity space, which would be applicable to more general medicine as well, is the idea of biological age.
Correct.
So we all have our chronological age. That's what we think of as our age. It's the number of birthdays we've had, but we also have a biological age. This is essentially how young or old our biology is. And it makes sense if you think about somebody who's 50 years old, but they look 60. And then you think of another person who's 50, but they look 40. Yep. And you hold those two people next to each other. The difference is so stark, that contrast of somebody who's biologically younger versus older. Now, it's not definitively true without actually doing some biomarkers, which I'll speak about in a moment. But that is most likely true just by looking at a picture of someone. You can get an idea if they're aging, have accelerated aging or not. Just like cigarette smoke will accelerate someone's aging and they'll look older, it actually literally is aging them internally as well on an organ level. So your biological age is reflective of things like your morbidity risk, your mortality risk, more accurately than your chronological age would be. And so it's also kind of like this North Star metric. It's a single metric that is indicative of your overall health. Now, you can do these comprehensive blood panels, which are important to try to zero in on specific issues that someone might have. But if you want to just have that North Star metric of like, is this person overall very healthy or not? The biological age test is actually very promising. Now, how do you measure biological age? There's a number of ways to do it, and different researchers and companies are releasing all different types of biological age markers. And so you're going to hear about it more and more, but not all tests are created equal. So there are some that might look at your microbiome, for example. Some might look at your metabolome. Some might look at your telomere length, and so on. The most advanced form of testing for biological age at this point is looking at your epigenome, your epigenetics. And even within there's a lot of complexity in the sense that some are not high quality tests. In other words, their accuracy and precision is not particularly good. And then you've got some that have been academically scrutinized and are the the top of the best. So let me quickly clarify what the epigenome is and how these tests work. So you have your genome, your genetics. Everyone's familiar with genetics at this point. Mm-hmm. But what's perhaps even more important than your genetics, and this is where lifestyle and environment come into play, is your epigenome. So your epigenome is which genes are turned on and off. So if your genetics are like a piano, your epigenome is like the piano player determining what song to play of your genes, right? And as you age, certain genes turn on that shouldn't, and certain genes turn off that shouldn't. It's almost like striking the wrong key. Additionally, based on your lifestyle and things like, we mentioned before, micronutrient inadequacies or cigarette smoke or excessive stress, not sleeping enough, so on and so forth, your epigenome is going to reflect that. And so scientists have been able to put together algorithms that can essentially determine your biological age, or your morbidity, mortality risk, and your ability to, like, your cellular functioning, based on these patterns within your epigenome.
So what are some of the markers you're looking at on the epigenetic side? Is it different methylation markers? Which ones do you like?
Yeah, so it's specifically methylation markers. So every algorithm is looking at different methylation sites and accounting differently. But the very first test, your audience might be familiar with the name Steve Horvath. So Steve Horvath mm-hmm. invented the first ones about a decade ago. But now we're on to, those were first generation tests. Now we're on to third generation tests. The most accurate one to this point is one called the Dunedin Pace test. It was created by researchers at Columbia University and Duke University. And that is looking, again, specifically at methylation markers. What's really unique about the Dunedin Pace clock is that it tells you your biological rate of aging right now. At this point in time, based on the lifestyle you are living, you are aging at maybe 1 biological year per chronological year, or maybe 0.8 biological years per chronological year. In other words, 20% slower than the average person your age. For me, for example, my results were 0.69. So I'm aging 31% slower, according to this test, than the average person my age would be aging.
Wow, that's amazing. And so what were some of those big markers? I know CpG is another big DNA methylation, epigenetic DNA marker. Is there any other big ones that just kind of come to mind that you're testing over at Novos?
Yeah, so we sell something called the Novos Age Clock, or the Novos Age Kit. Within that kit, there's 3 different tests. So the first one is we have a license with the creators of the Dunedin Pace clock. So that's going to tell you your pace of aging. The second one is biological age. It will tell you like an actual number of how old you are biologically. Now, that's not as accurate as Dunedin Pace. As I just said, Dunedin Pace is the most accurate, but people still want to check off that box, so we provide that. And then the third is telomere length and percentile by chronological age. So your telomeres are the protective end caps of your chromosomes. They protect the DNA. And as you age, they get shorter and shorter. With each cell division, they're going to get shorter. You can imagine if you have a lot of DNA damage, a lot of cellular damage from things like inflammatory environments, oxidation, and so on, your telomeres are going to get shorter quicker because you need to repair those cells and create new cells. So your telomeres are getting shorter with each cell division. So it's not a direct marker of your biological age, but it is correlated with aging. The positive is that you can actually, and the same thing with epigenetic age, you can actually improve these numbers based on lifestyle interventions. So we can tell you your percentile by age. Ideally, you're going to be at the higher end of that percentile. Now, telomere length it doesn't really matter too much when you're within the sweet spot of, maybe above the 30th, 40th percentile. But once you get lower, below a specific number of kilos, that is when short telomeres can actually lead to negative health outcomes. So there's a correlation between very short telomeres and things like gastrointestinal cancer, mortality, and so on. So for this test, we really suggest that users look at it as, are my telomeres too short? If not, okay, as long as I'm within a reasonable percentile, there's not much more to look at. You can check off that box that your telomeres are at a good point.
And essentially, our telomeres are like the little caps at the end of our shoelaces, so to speak, on our chromosomes, correct? Is that kind of
Yes.
a good summary of what they are? And essentially,
Yes.
these things shorten as we age in an accelerated fashion. What are some simple strategies that we can do? I mean, I'm guessing some of those nutrients that we talked about in the beginning may help. What are some simple things that come to mind that we can do to help lengthen those telomeres?
Yeah. So when I was mentioning before the general health supplements or the micronutrients, that's one part of the equation. The second part of the supplementation equation is longevity supplements. This is what we specialize in at Novos, along with our scientific advisory board that I mentioned earlier. We created the first and only product to address all 12 of the biological causes of aging that I mentioned earlier from the Hallmarks of Aging scientific paper. And so those 12 hallmarks, they include telomere attrition, the shortening of telomeres. Also includes genomic instability. As I mentioned, when your genetics are unstable, in other words, DNA damage, you're going to have shorter telomeres as a consequence because of all of the repair that needs to take place, right? So you go down the list of all of these 12 different hallmarks of aging, inflammaging, cellular senescence, mitochondrial dysfunction, epigenetic alterations, and so on. It's a complex web where they all play into each other. And so product like Novos Core, which is our foundational supplement, it has multiple ingredients in it that directly impact telomeres in terms of helping to reduce their shortening, but also are synergistically working on these other hallmarks simultaneously. And we base this formula on more than 400 scientific studies, which you can find on novoslabs.com/evidence. We make it all open source. There's a table there where you can actually search through those studies. You can insert keywords like for specific health issues that you might be curious about to see if we have ingredients that may impact those health issues. And we've also done a number of in vitro and in vivo studies on it. So in vitro, we've looked at DNA damage. We've looked at cellular senescence. We've looked at biological age in a case study, and we've reduced biological age. So I can talk about any one of those if you'd like, dig into the details. But the quick answer to your question is that we have a formulation that could potentially slow down the shortening of telomeres and potentially even lengthen them.
That's cool. Let's talk about maybe some of the top 3 to 5 nutrients that come to mind. Maybe I'll just pull one out. NAD is a big one. NAD, nicotinamide, adenosine dinucleotide. Thoughts on that? How does that plug into healthy aging?
Sure. So NAD has really come to the forefront of the longevity market's mind, largely because of Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard and the work that he has done on NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide specifically. Though he's not the only researcher looking at NAD, he's the most public-facing one. But there are other very well-respected researchers doing top caliber work on NAD and NMN and so on, looking at their effects on aging. So with that said, NAD is involved in the Krebs cycle. And if you remember, the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle is the cycle which leads to ATP production, so energy production. But there are other things that take place as well. For example, the production of sirtuins. And sirtuins are specific molecules that are capable of repairing DNA after damage. So if you go out in the sun and you have UV radiation, there's damage being caused every second to your DNA. Perhaps millions of DNA are being damaged every second that you're out in the sun. And you need to repair that DNA. And so sirtuins are capable of doing that. Now, NAD levels, they go down significantly as we age. And pretty much from birth, as we're aging, we have less and less NAD. And so NMN, is basically a precursor. It is an ingredient, a molecule that our bodies naturally produce that then leads to the production of NAD that then is involved again in energy production, in protecting the DNA or repairing the DNA, and so on. And so NMN is actually an ingredient that you can ingest, and it is absorbed orally. And we sell it as a product called Novos Boost. And so that is one exciting ingredient, but there are many others that
Can
are
you get
very
the
exciting
similar
ones.
benefit as NAD as NMN, or do they have specific benefits kind of unto themselves, unto their own?
So NAD, you cannot absorb it orally. So there are companies that sell NAD in oral form. It's not absorbed. You're wasting your money. You need to take it in the form of either NMN or NR, nicotinamide riboside. We believe that NMN is the superior choice for a number of reasons. If you go on novoslabs.com and you search for NMN versus NR, you'll see more than a dozen reasons we believe NMN is better. But ultimately, you need to take either NMN or NR to increase those NAD levels. It could be argued you could also take niacin. Niacin can also increase NAD levels, but there
How about
are
with
potential
Niagen? How
side
about with
effects from
Niagen? I know Niagen does the nicotinamide riboside chloride. Is that one pretty well absorbed for NAD?
Yeah. So Niagen, a Chromadex company, they have an NR product. What I would say is that they are they have a lot of money invested in trying to make the claim that NR is superior to NMN. But if you look at the academic literature, it would seem that NMN is actually superior to NR.
Okay, got it. Now I know I have notes actually from that podcast. I think he was that gentleman that you talked about that talked about the sirtuin pathway out of Harvard there. I think Joe Rogan had him on a few years ago, and I had some notes from that podcast I wanted to run by you. He talked about a couple other things on that podcast. He talked about obviously insulin resistance. He talked about metformin and how I think that has similar input on those sirtuin pathways. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so metformin, metformin is a prescription drug. It's prescribed to diabetics to help them with insulin resistance and to be able to better cope with carbohydrates.
And that works off more of the AMPK pathway, I think, right?
It does.
Anti-aging, yeah.
It does work off more of the AMPK pathway. It's also, it's what's known as a dirty molecule. So it's got many different biological pathways that it impacts, and we don't fully comprehend exactly how it works. But with that said, it, among other things, it is a mitochondrial stressor. So it's mildly toxic to mitochondria. But if you get the right dosage of it, it's most likely a hormetic stressor. So that little bit of toxicity then brings the mitochondria to a healthier state. So you'll have stronger mitochondria and more mitochondria. Now, the thing is about metformin is it's not clearly beneficial to all people in all walks of life. For example, I don't take metformin. The reason being that I'm very physically active. I am athletic. I weightlift. It's been found that metformin can reduce the benefits of exercise. I'm already putting a lot of stress on my mitochondria through my exercise. So do I really need another stressor? Hormesis is all about balance and not overwhelming the system, right? And so I could potentially overwhelm the mitochondria by having both. And so I choose to be a little bit more conservative with it. Now, if you are overweight, have high blood glucose levels, and your doctor prescribes metformin to you, it's probably going to be beneficial for you for the sake of longevity. There was a study that looked at diabetics taking metformin, diabetics taking another prescription drug for diabetes, and then non-diabetics. And it found that the diabetics taking metformin had longer lifespans and lower incidences of cancer than the other two groups. So in other words, better than the non-diabetics. And so that seems to indicate that it's metformin. It's not even necessarily the reduction of blood glucose because the other drug didn't fare as well. but it is metformin specifically that can have that power. So
Interesting.
It still needs a lot of research. It's not definitively going to help all people in all cases, but it is a longevity prescription drug. Not as powerful as rapamycin. Rapamycin is another longevity drug in that it's actually the most powerful. It's considered the gold standard in longevity research is rapamycin.
And is that working on the mTOR pathways, the mammalian target of rapamycin? Now, when we talk about mTOR, reducing protein, intermittent fasting, these things play a role as well. But how do you slice that as someone that's lifting, that needs that anabolic bump that protein provides you? How do you splice the fact that you need protein, but it's also impacting some of these mTOR pathways?
Yeah, so I look at it as when I think about protein and the amount that I'm getting in and so on. First of all, I think of acute dosages, and I also think of what does my body need based on the stimulus I'm giving my body. So if I'm stimulating my body and weightlifting it, and my muscles are looking for that protein to be able to repair themselves and come back a slight bit stronger each time, which is essentially how muscles are built. For me to then get, as the way I look at it, as what is the minimum effective dose that I can take in of the protein to be able to maintain my body's needs, the demands for that protein without going above it. I also then do things like time restricted feeding, and occasionally we'll do a prolonged water fast of two days, typically, sometimes 3, sometimes 1. But I'll do that once every couple of months, once every 2 to 3 months, which will also reduce the mTOR. Novos Core also contains some ingredients that will downregulate mTOR to a certain degree, and also stimulate AMP kinase, which you mentioned earlier about metformin. It'll also, there are some ingredients that have been researched that can potentially increase FOXO levels. FOXO is a gene and a protein that is associated with centenarians. And our bodies can produce it, but centenarians produce more of it. Well, there's certain ingredients in Novos that have been found to potentially increase FOXO levels too. So there's a whole host of different biological pathways that we're cognizant of in the formulation of our product that are associated with longevity.
Excellent. Now, what about intermittent fasting or I wanted to go back to actually, because on the sirtuin pathway, you talked about NAD or using NR. What about resveratrol? What about some of these antioxidants like resveratrol or curcumin? Where do they plug in on that sirtuin pathway for anti-aging?
So I have to say, I'm going to shock some people. I am not a fan of resveratrol. Resveratrol is an ingredient that was made famous also by David Sinclair, who I mentioned earlier, more than a decade ago. And there was a company that he had sold to GlaxoSmithKline called Sertris Pharmaceuticals. They had acquired it specifically for resveratrol and the promise behind it, but they were never able to replicate the mouse studies and apply it to humans. And they essentially shut down that company after acquiring it for more than $700 million. And if we fast forward to today, there is no convincing evidence that resveratrol does anything for health for humans, particularly for healthy humans. But in general, there's no convincing evidence in humans. It's still being promoted largely because of David, promoting it. But it's actually controversial. If you search resveratrol controversy, you'll see a couple of articles written and videos produced by Lifespan.io, a nonprofit in the longevity space that explores the controversy behind the resveratrol. As an alternative to resveratrol, we're actually bigger fans of a molecule called pterostilbene. Pterostilbene is a relative. It's like a cousin of resveratrol. It looks very similar molecularly. Resveratrol is derived from grapes. It's the red wine molecule. Pterostilbene can be found in blueberries, for example. But in addition to pterostilbene being better absorbed orally, significantly better absorbed orally, it has a much longer half-life in the blood. And it also has 3 methyl groups attached. And methyl groups, as we were talking about before, methylation in the epigenome our bodies need those methyl groups to be able to properly methylate, to properly regulate the epigenome. And there's more convincing evidence of pterostilbene being positive for health than there is for resveratrol. So it's controversial because there's so much hype around resveratrol based on the reputation that Dr. Sinclair has brought for it. But if you talk to scientists behind the scenes, as we do regularly at Novos, there's people who are most informed in the space actually are not fans of resveratrol and would promote pterostilbene over resveratrol.
How about curcumin? What do you think about that? I know a lot of benefits, anti-cancer, immune-wise, inflammation, anti-inflammatory-wise. What do you think about that?
Yeah, curcumin is a promising ingredient. I've experimented with it somewhat as well. It definitely has health benefits to it. The only hesitation I have with curcumin is that oftentimes the forms that are being sold are forms that are supposed to be absorbed at super physiological levels, like levels beyond what humans have ever ingested. And it's always presented as this is the better way to do things, like a lipospheric encapsulation, right? This is done with other molecules as well. But what I would caution the listener to consider is that our bodies are very good at regulating homeostasis, and they know what they need, and they'll take it in, and they know what they don't need, and will remove it through the liver, will pee it out, and so on. Typically, except for heavy metals, obviously, and fat-soluble vitamins, and so on. If you're taking something in a lipospheric encapsulation to get super high levels of absorption, your body is probably going to be absorbing more than it otherwise would, and it's going to actually permeate the cell wall more so than it otherwise would. And so you might actually be doing, like, causing harm in the long term. I tend to be more conservative with all of this and allow my body to determine what the proper levels are, and also look at scientific research and see, for example, we can go back to NMN. We talked about it before. NMN, the dosages that are typically used in scientific studies that show positive effects are between 250 milligrams and up to about 500 to 600 milligrams. It tops out at that 550, 600 milligram level. Once you go above that, you're saturated, right? So now there are companies that sell lipospheric forms of this at a higher price, at a premium. And people mistakenly believe that this is superior because it's absorbed better. But again, scientific studies show that you don't need to go above that. And if you do, it might actually cause harm. Too much NAD can actually be negative. It can actually be used in negative biological pathways. It's not only positive ones. So I like to give the body what it needs to then be able to determine for itself what is the optimal use of it. And going back to curcumin, I think the same way. If you're getting natural dosages of it, maybe with some bioperine, essentially, black pepper, okay, that's going to increase absorption. Maybe that's the limit. It's still natural, right? But lipospheric encapsulations and taking it to this whole other level, that's where I wouldn't take it that far.
Excellent. Very good. Well, anything else you want to leave here for the listeners, right? If you're someone who's like, man, I got to get my stuff in order. I want to be healthier. I want to age gracefully. I'm hitting 40. What are some of the simple things from a supplement standpoint? We know diet, we know sleep, we know lifestyle. That's like foundation, right? So let's assume that that's kind of maxed out. What are one or two supplements, if you're starting out, you're a newbie here, what would be the first one or two things you would reach for out of the gates?
Yeah, so I'd start with the general health side of things. And so what we covered before, I'll reiterate now. So one is get a really solid, strong multivitamin. For example, the Life Extension brand has a 2-a-day capsule. It's the right forms of biologically active nutrients. That's one example. There are other high quality brands out there. I wouldn't go for the cheap brands that you find at the drugstore. Go for a high quality one, typically only going to cost you $20 to $30 per month. So get that first and foremost. Second, make sure you're getting adequate potassium. Most people are deficient, as we talked about, near 100% according to N. Haynes, insufficient.
Correct.
So, integrate maybe some potassium salts like the Lite salt that we talked about. Choline, make sure you're getting enough through your diet. If you're not, add things like maybe lecithin or grass-fed meat, like you mentioned, or egg yolks and so on. fish oil, get that, and then make sure your vitamin D and K are balanced. And typically you can buy that as a single supplement. That's the general health. And then if you want to take things to the next level, consider products like what we have formulated at Novos. That's Novos Core and Novos Boost. As I mentioned, the first and only supplements to address all 12 of the hallmarks of aging simultaneously. We didn't get to go into the studies we did, but very quick summary. We were able to reduce DNA damage from irradiation by over 70% in a human in vitro study. We were able to reduce DNA damage, double strand breaks from chemotherapeutics in another in vitro study that we haven't published yet. We're able to reduce the size of senescent cells, which are essentially zombie cells in our bodies that increase exponentially as we age, and they cause inflammation in the body. We're able to reduce the size of those by the same order of magnitude as rapamycin, the prescription gold standard. And in vivo, so a human case study that we did with our products, we gave the biological age test before Novos Core and Boost and 6 months after taking it. And 73% of participants reduced their biological pace of aging by a statistically significant margin, and 0% of people accelerated their biological pace of aging. So despite lifestyle stressors that you would expect some people to speed up their pace of aging, nobody did. And you can find all of the summaries of these studies at novoslabs.com/evidence.
And some of the supplements that you picked to formulate in some of your products were the NMR, right? What were the other kind of nuance? NMM. Yep, got it. Which is kind of an NAD derivative you talked about. Any other big ones that you didn't mention to the listeners, but that you've put into your products to formulate specifically?
Yes. So alpha ketoglutarate is one, specifically the calcium form, which is critical. That's been found to reduce biological aging.
And that plugs into the Krebs cycle a lot too, right?
It does. Yes.
What else?
Glycine. Glycine is an amino acid. It's found specifically in collagen and gelatin. We don't get enough of it in our diets nowadays. It's extended lifespan in many different species. With higher levels in humans are associated with heart health and lower levels of inflammation at the cellular level. They can support glucose metabolism and so on.
I've seen that also works really well synergistically with NAC as well. Are you familiar with the data on that?
Yep. Yes. That particularly for older people, who for the sake of glutathione. So combining NAC with glycine can increase levels of glutathione, the very powerful antioxidant that our bodies produce.
Very good. What was that next one, Chris?
Pterostilbene, which I mentioned before, which is the cousin of resveratrol, much more powerful. Fisetin. Fisetin is a molecule found in strawberries. It's also found to positively impact senescent cells, which I mentioned earlier, though we actually have a more significant impact on senescent cells through the combination of our ingredients than fisetin does on its own. It's also potentially able to combat inflammation at a cellular level. Another one that's really interesting that people might be surprised to hear is microdose lithium. So microdose lithium, we're talking about the level of about 1 milligram per day, which is roughly what we could get through a very healthy natural diet, including natural water from like well water, or San Pellegrino water, for example, has high levels of lithium in it. We've evolved consuming lithium in our diets, and now we have practically none of it. Now, we're not talking about prescription levels of lithium, where it's used for bipolar disorder,
right?
And it's 50, 100 times higher levels. We're talking about very, very low levels, which are correlated with, you can find a lot of research about this if you search for it, lower level of suicide of like in communities that have it naturally in their water supply, suicidal ideation, murder, rape. So essentially, better psychological health. It's been considered to possibly be a potent antidepressant, though I can't speak to that, for FDA reasons. But that's something that people have considered. But it also has an impact on the epigenome and neurological health in the long term as well. It's a very powerful ingredient.
Very cool. I know you're talking about the lithium carbonates, the drug. Maybe the orotate would be more of the supplement form of that. And you're saying there's low doses in the San Pellegrino?
Yes. Lithium orotate, lithium aspartate. Yes, those forms are not found in prescription drugs. Yep.
Great, Chris. Anything else you want to leave the listeners with today?
So I just suggest that people, if they're interested in this, they check out novoslabs.com. We're a public benefit corporation, so we offer a lot of free resources on our website. We have a questionnaire that once you fill it out, you'll have your own dashboard with personalized recommendations for the things that you specifically can benefit most from to slow down your pace of aging. We have something called Face Age, where you can take a selfie and it will tell you how young you look based on artificial intelligence, and then give you tips for improving your skin health markers.
Awesome.
We have more than 150 scientifically referenced articles written by PhDs and MDs. And then if you're really geeky about it, you can go to my blog, which is slowmyage.com. And that's where I blog about my personal lifestyle, my biological age results, which I've tested with more than a dozen epigenetic clocks and metabolomic clocks, telomere clocks, and so on. And I've got results that the lab has said they've never seen before. And I've been covered in GQ magazine and New York Post and Business Insider and so on, based on the results that I've gotten. So I share all of that on the website for free.
That's excellent. And that's novoslabs.com, Novos with an S, labs with an S.com. We'll put the link down below, and slowmyage.com. I love a lot of the nutrients and the compounds that you're talking for anti-aging and longevity. They're very much research driven. They're cost effective as well. So I like how you're kind of taking these and making them very accessible for the average person. That's great. Just real quick, walk the listeners through just like your average day. Like, what does your day look like? You're this biohacker, anti-aging guru. What does your day look like? Like, what time? How long are you sleeping? What does a breakfast, lunch, and dinner look for you, or your typical meals?
Yeah, so I'm sleeping a good amount. I'm in bed about 9 hours, and I'm sleeping for over 8 of those hours. I'm tracking it with my Oura Ring or with my Apple Watch. I make sure my bedroom is the perfect setting. So about 67 degrees Fahrenheit. I wear a sleep mask. I wear earplugs, and that reduces any distractions or arousals from noises or my girlfriend moving around or getting up before me and so on. My meals. I have my first meal at about 12 p.m. or 1 p.m. And so I'm basically doing a 16-8 time restricted feeding window. And I'm typically having 3 meals. Sometimes I might throw a snack in there, depending, like maybe I worked out really hard and I'm having that craving. But typically 3 meals. It's always a lot of vegetables first and foremost, olive oil, might be sardines, it might be smoked salmon, it might be cooked salmon, it might be white meat chicken. I don't overdo protein, but I'm getting probably, I weigh about 175 pounds. I'm probably getting about 120 to 140 grams of protein per day, which is enough for me to maintain the muscle that I put on and the strength that I have. I do a lot of cardio and strength training. So I'm running 5 days a week. I'm bicycling 1 day a week, and I'm lifting 3 days to 4 days per week. So, I mean, that's the high level. I go into a lot more detail on my website on Slow My Age. And in fact, one of the posts I referenced earlier goes specifically into my diet and all of the actual foods I'm incorporating, like the dark chocolates and the foods high in polyphenols and so on.
That's great. And then with the cardio that you're doing, do you like to do interval, kind of a hit, high intensity, kind of high, then rest? Or are you kind of doing more of like a Peter Attia zone 2, keeping your heart rate in the low 100s at that talking ability, but slightly out of breath, if you will?
Yeah. So it's good you asked, because when I said I'm running 5 days per week, it's actually 3 of those days are on my lifting days. And on those days, I'm in zone 2. So as you referenced, Peter Attia talks a lot about zone 2 cardio. On the non-lifting days, that's when I'll go longer and I'll incorporate HIIT training in it. And I'm not going to stay in zone 2 in those training sessions. So those sessions, I might be in zone 3, zone 4, and then zone 5 for the HIIT side of things. So I'm probably running consistently at zone 4 for most of that run, maybe 35, 40 minutes of it. And then maybe 15 minutes of it towards the end. I'm now doing some interval sprints to finish up my run and make my way back home.
Well, excellent, Chris. I really appreciate the information here today. Novoslabs.com, slowmyage.com, links down below. Anything else you want to leave the listeners with, Chris?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Awesome, man. Well, great chatting with you. You have an awesome day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.